Welcome back. So I want to deploy my code to Firebase, but before I do it, I want to do a few things. First of all, I want to start actually talking and listening on production to the production backend. So remember, we're going to end up having our front end now in production, and that means that we also need to communicate with our backend that's in production. So let's start by just preparing our Angular application for deployment. We'll jump into the Angular code right here, and one thing I'll notice right away is when we look into the service right now, it's actually looking at our local host. So that means it's still looking for the code locally on our machine for development. Now we could just change this into actually looking at our new Legos for Life API right here. I could just do that manually like this and just paste this in there. But that would mean every time where I switch between production and development, I would have to go and change this line of code. And there are easier ways to do it instead of doing that manually every time. So what Angular set up for us is if you go down to environments in the code here, you can actually go and you can find a development environment, which is this guy, and a production environment. That's the two default environments that are already set up for us. In the production environment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new set of information, a new property right here, and that one is going to be our new route, which is going to be the the production URL right here for the backend in production. I'm also going to do the same thing for the other file right here, the other environment file. That's for development. So if we go back to the service, that should actually be this guy right here. So let's copy that and just put it into our environment file and just make another API. And this one again is for development. And there we should look at the local host that's locally on our machine, right? So this is how we set it up. Now, if we are working in development, it's going to point at this one. And if we're working in production, we want it to point to this one. We're not quite done yet, because if we go back to the service, we of course need to explain to this guy where it can still find the different environments. We can do that by calling the environment file that we just went into, pick the one for development, this one, the top one, not the production one, but this one. And there we can now say .api, that was the one we just built. So in development mode, we're now going to use this one. And then we'll just add a slash right here, a dot, and then a slash API, slash products. And we're pretty much back to the different setups we have. Now, if we're running in production, we're going to use this file right here. And if we're running in development, we're going to use this file right here. So that's how it will now switch between the two endpoints, either this one or this one, depending if we're in production or we are inside development mode. Now, how do we actually start using this? How do we even build an Angular app so it's ready for production? There are a few ways to do it again, but we're going to pick this time the ng build command. Now the build command is a way for us to kind of take all this Angular code. There's a lot of stuff in here we don't want to share with the world. Everything that's built for development, we don't want to share that with the world. So we can do an ng build in order to create a web app for us that's going to compress everything and make it ready for a web server to kind of show and work with an Angular app in the cloud. We can do an ng build, but that would still use this development file right here. So the way you do it is we just put in production in the end right here. Actually, if we do --prod, I think that's easier to explain. --prod like this just means that we're going to use the file with the .prod in the end right here. Let's try and execute this and you'll see what happens. It gives you kind of a deprecated warning. It'll still work, but you can go and read. Now you can actually put in production instead as the name. But this is just kind of referring to when you build this code now, use this file to figure out what the API should be instead of actually using this file to figure out what the API should be. And that's ways for you to kind of work differently with development compared to production code. It'll do a build for us, it'll take a bit of time, and when it's done, it's actually taking the entire Angular setup that you have, it's cleaned the code so it's ready for production, and then it ends up with these files right here. And let's have a look at those. They'll be shown inside the dist folder. There we go. And in the dist folder, there's a new folder called Legos for Life. So next lesson, we'll try and deploy it. Now we have an Angular app ready actually to deploy to a web server right here under this dist folder. So see you next time where we'll try and actually push it onto Firebase.